My quiet retirement was shattered. They came from my past, but what they found was a community secretly armed and ready to explode. My hands trembled, not from age, though at 93 they often did, but from a simmering fury. "You are too old to be playing rancher anyway," a slick-suited man sneered, his words a venomous spit in my face. An excavator, monstrous and yellow, idled behind him, its massive claw poised to tear down the weathered fence I'd built with my own hands. They waved their phony papers, these so-called HOA enforcers, threatening to demolish my life's work over landscape violation. I pointed a shaky finger toward my property marker, the boundary I'd respected for decades, and they actually laughed. Oh, what a mistake that was, because moments later, a black SUV roared into my dusty yard, brakes shrieking, kicking up a cloud of defiance. The man who emerged, silent at first, pulled on black gloves, grabbed his phone, and held up something that made their smug faces drain of color. And the blonde woman, Veronica Vance, the self-proclaimed HOA chair, she went ghost white the instant her eyes met his. Everything changed. You simply won't believe what happened next. Let me tell you how it all truly began. The peaceful morning sun, usually a comfort as it filtered through the pines surrounding my lakeside home, was rudely interrupted by a phone call that flipped my world on its head. For 30 years, I, Henry Hank Miller, a former carpenter, had lived what I believed was a quiet retirement on my 15-acre haven overlooking Pine Lake. Every outbuilding, every fence, a testament to a time when my back didn't ache with every movement, when my hands were steady, not prone to the tremors of 93 years. But peace, I was about to discover, is often just the deceptive calm before someone decides to shatter everything you've painstakingly built. They arrived promptly at 9:47 a.m., 5 figures in sharp business suits, clipboards clutched like scepters of absolute dominion. They emerged from 2 pristine white SUVs, and something immediately felt wrong. Sure, they wore the typical HOA uniform, pressed khakis and polo shirts, but their movements were unnervingly synchronized, as if rehearsed. Each had an earpiece, overkill for a neighborhood dispute, and their matching watches glinted with a military precision that chilled me far more than any suburban bureaucracy should. The woman leading the group, Veronica in her 40s, introduced herself with a smile that was too perfect, too practiced, utterly devoid of warmth. "Miss Nimble," she announced, her eyes scanning her clipboard with theatrical authority, "we're here regarding multiple violations that have been reported over the past 6 months. I'm afraid we have a legal order for immediate remediation." She held up an official-looking document, embossed seals and signatures that seemed genuine enough. But the way she pronounced my name, a slight, almost imperceptible hesitation, sent ice through my veins. It was as if she'd nearly said something else. 30 years I'd lived as Frank Morrison, and no one had ever slipped up like that. The quiet life I'd meticulously constructed suddenly felt as fragile as morning dew. "Ma'am," I began, my voice surprisingly steady, despite the growing knot of dread in my gut, pointing to the property line markers I'd set decades ago. "I've lived here since These buildings existed before your community was anything but empty land." Behind Veronica, one of her men murmured into his earpiece, words like "target confirmed" and "proceed to phase 2." Not exactly standard HOA jargon. Veronica's hollow smile remained fixed, but her eyes held the cold, calculating glint of someone who'd done this many times before. "Mr. Miller, property age doesn't exempt you from current safety standard. We have reports of structural hazards, environmental violations, and aesthetic concerns that affect property values for the entire lake community." Without waiting for my reply, the excavator operator roared his machine to life, its diesel engine drowning out any hope of a reasonable conversation. But instead of heading for my fence, as I'd anticipated, the massive yellow beast pivoted, rumbling towards my old barn. My heart hammered against my ribs. That barn, the one building I desperately hoped they'd overlook. It hit me then. This wasn't about routine compliance. They knew exactly what they were after. They'd done their homework. "Wait," I shouted, dropping all pretense of confused elderly cooperation. "Not that building," but Veronica only smiled wider, pulling what looked like a tranquilizer gun from her jacket pocket. "The kind animal control uses. Definitely not standard HOA equipment, was it?" That's when I did something I hadn't done in 3 decades. My arthritic fingers fumbled under the porch railing, fighting against the adrenaline coursing through me, but muscle memory guided them to the hidden panic button. The tiny red light blinked once. Signal sent. The phone number it was connected to, one I'd prayed I'd never have to use, was now activated. Veronica noticed my movement. Her professional mask slipped, just for a flicker, revealing something far more sinister beneath. Now, Henry, she purred and my blood ran ice cold. Let's not make this more complicated than it needs to be. A rising crescendo of engines tore through the morning air. A black SUV, then two more, hurtling down the dirt road toward my property. Was this salvation? Not exactly, as the lead vehicle screeched to a halt, kicking up a dust cloud that made the fake HOA crew instinctively recoil. A wave of mingled relief and terror washed over me. 30 years of meticulously guarded secrets were about to explode into the open. The driver's door swung wide, and out stepped Marcus Miller, my adopted son, a SWAT officer. He thought he was just checking on his old man's property dispute. His gaze swept the scene with practiced assessment, his mind already calculating threats. The growing dread was a crushing weight in my chest. I was about to shatter the only family I had left. "Son," I whispered, knowing he couldn't hear me over the roaring excavator. "They found me." Marcus moved with the fluid precision of 1,000 tactical entries, but his eyes weren't scanning for standard threats. They were fixed on me, his father, the man who'd raised him since he was 12, standing defiantly before a seemingly routine HOA spat. Two of his SWAT colleagues emerged, automatically taking crossfire positions, their training kicking in even as they surely wondered why Marcus had called for backup over a neighborhood squabble. I watched my son's face, the gears turning as he processed the scene. The excavator, the professional-looking crew, and me, a scarecrow protecting a field already ablaze. "I'm Marcus Miller," he boomed, his voice carrying the undeniable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "What exactly are you people doing on my family's property?" Veronica's reaction was immediate and chilling. Instead of deferring to law enforcement, she smiled. A confident, knowing smile. "Miller," she said, letting the name hang in the air like smoke. Or should I say the adopted son of Henry Castellano. The word struck Marcus like a physical blow. 30 years of carefully constructed lies crumbled before my eyes. His tactical stance faltered, his professional composure cracking as he turned to me, confusion and a hint of betrayal clouding his gaze. "Dad," he said slowly, his voice laced with disbelief. "What is she talking about?" I'd rehearsed this conversation 1,000 times over 30 years, but none of those mental scenarios included armed crews, heavy machinery, or the very real possibility that we might all be dead within the hour. The truth, when it finally emerged, tasted like 3 decades of carefully swallowed guilt. "Son," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. "My real name is Henry Castellano. Back in 1993, I witnessed Victor Rossi, head of the Rossi crime family, ordering the execution of 3 FBI agents who were closing in on his money laundering operation. I saw it all. I watched Marcus's face as the implications sank in, saw him mentally replaying years of what he thought was normal family history. I testified against the entire Rossi organization, put 14 people in federal prison, and dismantled a criminal empire that had operated for 40 years. The FBI gave me a new identity, relocated me here and told me to disappear forever." Veronica savored every moment of my confession, her smile widening as she watched the foundation of my family crack like ice on a warming lake. Yet, even as his world imploded, Marcus's training kicked in. "So, this isn't about HOA violations," he stated, his hand instinctively moving toward his sidearm. "This is about revenge." Veronica nodded, a teacher pleased her student had finally grasped a difficult concept. "Very good, Marcus, though I prefer to think of it as completing unfinished business. Victor Rossi Sr. died in federal prison last week, but not before he made arrangements for a very specific list of people who needed to be addressed." She gestured to her crew, who had now shed their suburban bureaucratic facade, openly displaying serious hardware. "Your father cost our organization everything. Time to return the favor." The excavator operator finally killed his engine, and in the sudden, eerie silence I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Veronica pulled out her phone, showing Marcus a document that made his face go even paler. "We're not just here for Henry," she said casually. "We have a list of 8 other witnesses from that case. People who thought they could destroy families and then hide behind federal protection for the rest of their lives. She scrolled through what looked like a detailed database, current addresses, family members, daily routines. 3 of them live right here in Pine Lake. Funny how the government thought putting witnesses together would make them safer. It just made our job more efficient. Marcus's eyes now scanned the property with a new intensity, seeing tactical advantages and escape routes instead of childhood memories. "How many people are you planning to kill today?" he asked, his voice chillingly calm, the kind of calm that precedes a storm of action. Veronica's laugh was like shattering glass. "Oh, Marcus, we're not killers. We're problem solvers. Your father and his friends are going to have tragic accidents, the kind that happen to elderly people all the time. Heart attacks, falls, house fires. Very sad but completely natural." She gestured toward the barn again, and I felt my last 30 years of security dissolve like morning mist. "Of course, we'll need to clean up any evidence that might complicate the narrative. That old barn, for instance, with whatever insurance policy your father has been hiding in there." Then, without warning, the barn exploded. A deafening roar, a fireball that sent debris raining down, leaving my ears ringing as if the world was ending. Veronica's crew didn't even flinch, confirming my horrifying suspicion. They'd been expecting it, probably planting charges while I was distracted by their theatrical display. 30 years of carefully preserved evidence, documents, recordings, photographs that could have jailed the remaining Rossi associates forever, all reduced to ash in bitter memory in mere seconds. I crumpled to my knees, not from weakness, but from the crushing realization that everyone I'd tried to protect for 3 decades was about to die because they'd finally found me. "Oops," Veronica chirped with mock concern. "Looks like we found Henry's insurance policy. What a shame about that evidence. Now there's nothing standing between us and a very quiet resolution to this 30-year-old problem." Marcus was already on his radio, frantically calling for backup, but Veronica held up her phone, displaying a text that made his face turn ashen. "All units currently engaged in priority situations," she read. "Estimated response time, 45 minutes. She tucked the phone away with a satisfied smirk. "Marcus, meet Detectives Smith and Jones from the County Sheriff's Department. They've been very helpful in ensuring we have all the time we need to complete our work here today." 2 men in sheriff's uniforms stepped from behind the excavator, and a growing horror consumed me. The corruption ran deeper than I'd ever imagined. 30 years of hiding, only to be betrayed by the very system meant to protect us. "Son," I whispered, "our time running out, everything I'd built, everything I'd tried to preserve, about to be annihilated along with the people I loved most." The smoke from the barn still billowed when Marcus made the life-altering decision. No waiting for backup that might never come. No negotiating with people who'd already shown their explosive intent. He grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the house with a desperate urgency that only comes from accepting you're utterly alone. "Dad, we need to move now," he commanded, his voice devoid of the earlier confusion. "Tell me what else they don't know about this property." I led him to the back of the barn's charred remains, where the fire hadn't quite reached the old chicken coop, revealing the metal hatch I'd prayed I'd never have to. 30 years of rust and debris couldn't hide it. The underground vault I'd built in 1995 had survived the blast. "Son," I said as we descended into the hidden chamber, "your old man wasn't just hiding from the mob. I was preparing for this very day. The vault was my life's work. 3 decades of collected intelligence, 47 cassette tapes of Rossi family conversations, financial records detailing money laundering stretching back to the 80s, photographs documenting murders, bribe, and illicit activities that never made it into the original federal case. But more crucially, it held evidence I'd gathered over the last 30 years, proof that the Rossi organization had rebuilt itself from prison, using corrupt law enforcement and political connections. I never stopped investigating them," I confessed to Marcus, who stared, awestruck, at the walls lined with filing cabinets and recording equipment. Every phone call, every meeting, every whisper of Rossi activity that crossed my path, I documented and stored. I knew they'd come for me eventually, and I wanted to ensure that when they did, I could take the entire rotten organization down with me. Marcus processed this revelation with the tactical brilliance that filled me with both pride and terror. "Dad," he said, picking up a recent file with photos and financial documents from just last month. "This means you've been living a double life for 30 years. You've been running your own intelligence operation." I nodded, the weight of 3 decades of deception settling between us like dust from the explosion above. I had no choice, son. The Federal Protection Program makes witnesses invisible, yes, but it also renders them powerless. I couldn't protect you or the other witnesses or any future victims unless I stayed one step ahead. Footsteps above reminded us that Veronica and her crew wouldn't wait much longer. Then Marcus asked the question I dreaded for 30 years. How much of my life has been a lie? I looked at my adopted son, this man who'd built a law enforcement career on the very principles I'd instilled in him, and realized the truth was both more painful and more profound than he could imagine. Your mother's death when you were 12, that was real, I said quietly. Your adoption, your education, your choice to become a police officer, all of that was your own decision, based on who you are. But yes, I influenced your environment, made sure you grew up with values that would serve you well if this day ever came. I pulled out a file containing Marcus's true background, his birth family's history, and the circumstances that brought him into my life. You were never just my cover story, son. You became my reason for staying alive long enough to see this through. The tactical situation above ground worsened rapidly. Through the vault's air vents, I could hear Veronica's voice, coordinating with her team and the corrupt deputies. Marcus, meanwhile, was devouring the evidence layout with the intensity of a raid planner. He was already thinking several moves ahead. Dad, we need to get this information to people who can act on it, he said, pulling out his phone, checking for a signal in the underground space. But first, we need to survive the next hour. That's when I told him about the other 3 families in Pine Lake, federal witnesses relocated here over the past 5 years. The FBI thought this was a secure environment. Elena Rodriguez used to handle finances for the Morales cartel, I explained. George Thompson was a hitman for the Chicago outfit before he turned state's evidence. The Williams family witnessed a murder-for-hire operation in Detroit. Marcus's expression shifted from shock to grim satisfaction. So, we're not dealing with helpless elderly neighbors, he mused. We're dealing with people who know how to fight back. I nodded, recalling the subtle ways we'd all assessed each other over the years, never directly acknowledging our pasts. Son, this community has been preparing for something like this for years. We have communication protocols, defensive positions, and people who remember how to handle themselves in violent situations. Veronica's voice grew closer. She was probably planning to flush us out with tear gas or worse. The real question was, after 30 years of peaceful retirement, had we grown too soft to survive what was coming? Marcus was already moving toward the vault's emergency exit, a tunnel I'd connected to the storm drain system beneath the property. Dad, he said, with a confidence that swelled my chest with pride, we're going to find out, but first we need to get to Elena Rodriguez's house and coordinate with the others. If Veronica's people did their homework, they know about the other witnesses too. I grabbed the most critical files and followed my son into the darkness, knowing that after 3 decades of hiding, we finally had to stand and fight. Behind us, I heard the vault door groan as it was forced open, and Veronica's voice echoed down into the space we'd just vacated. Time's up, Henry, she shrieked. Ready or not, we're coming to finish this conversation. The tunnel was dark, cramped, leading us toward neighbors who were either our salvation or already dead. We were about to discover if 30 years of careful preparation had been enough. We emerged from the storm drain behind Elena Rodriguez's house, just as 6 black SUVs roared down the main road into Pine Lake, their engines proclaiming that the time for subtlety had officially ended. The man who stepped from the lead vehicle was a ghost from my past, someone I'd hoped never to see again. Anthony Tony Rossi Jr., Victor's son. He'd spent the last 20 years in federal prison, nurturing his hatred and planning this exact moment. He was larger than his father, harder, radiating the controlled violence of 2 decades behind bars. Henry Castellano, he bellowed across the yard, his voice effortlessly cutting through the morning air. My father spent his last 20 years in a concrete box because of you. He died saying, your name. Today I keep the promise I made at his funeral. This wasn't Veronica's quiet operation. This was war. Marcus immediately shifted into tactical mode, using hand signals to coordinate with Elena Rodriguez, who appeared on her porch, clutching what looked like a military radio, moving with the precision of someone who'd once managed communications for Makama's most sophisticated drug cartels. Across the street, George Thompson emerged from his house. I was stunned to see the elderly man I'd known for 5 years now cradling a sniper rifle, calculating angles and distances with the cold professionalism of a man who'd killed for money and was ready to do it again for survival. The Williams family's teenage son zipped between houses, coordinating defensive positions and escape routes with a tactical awareness that suggested his parents had taught him skills not found in any high school curriculum. Tony Rossi Jr. had brought 12 armed men who fanned out with military precision, establishing overlapping fields of fire and controlling every main road. But Tony didn't know that Pine Lake had been designed for precisely this scenario. Every house had been subtly modified over the years, providing defensive advantages invisible from the outside. Elena Rodriguez's radio crackled to life with communications from families I'd barely spoken to in years. People who'd been living their quiet lives while secretly preparing for the day their pasts caught up. Unit 3 reports Tony's people moving toward the Thompson house, she said calmly. Unit 5 has eyes on the road. Unit 7 is in position to block the main exit. My peaceful retirement community, I realized, was a fortress, waiting 30 years for someone to attack. The confrontation truly began when Tony strode across my front yard as if he owned it, flanked by 2 men whose hardened faces spoke of prison yards and war zones. "Henry," he hissed, his voice laced with casual menace that made my skin crawl. "You cost my family everything. Our money, our territory, our respect. 20 years I've been planning how to pay you back for that." He gestured toward the smoking ruins of my barn. Veronica thought she could handle this quietly, keep it professional. But this isn't business. This is family. I stepped out from behind Elena Rodriguez's porch, feeling every one of my 93 years, yet determined he wouldn't see fear in my eyes. "Tony," I said, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "your father chose violence over family. I chose to protect mine. If you want to blame someone for his choices, look in a mirror." That's when Marcus made his move, his SWAT training kicking in, outflanking 2 of Tony's men and disarming them before they even knew what happened. Marcus wasn't just fighting for his life, he was fighting for a family and a community he was only just beginning to truly understand. "This ends here," he yelled at Tony, his service weapon aimed squarely at the crime boss's chest. "You're trespassing on federal witness protection property, threatening civilian lives and operating with explosives. Surrender now, and maybe you live to see trial." Tony's laugh was a harsh, breaking sound. "Kid, you think this is about law and order? This is about blood and honor. Your daddy destroyed my family's honor. Today I restore it." The shooting started when one of Tony's men tried for a clean shot at Marcus from behind the excavator. From his second-story window, George Thompson's sniper rifle cracked once, ending that threat permanently. What followed was 15 minutes of the most intense urban combat I'd ever witnessed. Tony's professional criminals found themselves outgunned, outmaneuvered by a community of federal witnesses who'd spent years preparing for this exact scenario. Elena Rodriguez calmly coordinated communications and tactical movements, providing covering fire with a precision that spoke of decades of violent experience. The Williams family's house became an ammunition depot and medical station, treating wounded neighbors with battlefield medicine skills that had no business existing in suburban America. Marcus was everywhere at once, using his SWAT training to coordinate the defense while trying to capture Tony alive for the intelligence he represented. But Anthony Rossi Jr. hadn't survived 20 years in federal prison by being foolish. When he realized his meticulously planned revenge was spiraling into disaster, he made the call that changed everything. Veronica Vance's voice crackled over a bullhorn from near the burning barn. "Attention everyone, this is Detective Veronica Vance, and I'm ordering all parties to lay down their weapons immediately. Federal backup is 3 minutes out, and anyone still fighting when they arrive will be treated as a hostile combatant." Marcus was already on his radio, and the response he received made his face go white with dawning comprehension. "All federal units engaged in priority operations," came the official reply. Estimated response time still 45 minutes. Veronica wasn't calling for backup, she was buying time. Time for something else. Something that would unfold in the next 3 minutes, rendering everything we'd fought for meaningless. I looked at my son, the man he had become, and realized that after 30 years of preparation, we were about to lose everything to a corruption far deeper than any of us had imagined. Veronica's something else arrived. 4 sheriff's department vehicles and a federal marshal's SUV, lights flashing, sirens wailing, as if responding to a terrorist attack, not a property dispute, But as the uniformed officers spread out, weapons drawn, I realized with growing horror they weren't here to arrest Tony's crew. They were here to arrest us. "All parties drop your weapons," Marshal Donovan announced through his bullhorn, his voice carrying undeniable federal authority. "You are interfering with an ongoing federal operation. Anyone who resists will be charged with obstruction of justice and conspiracy." Marcus looked at me, betrayal in his eyes as he realized the system he'd served his entire career had been corrupted from within. And I knew Veronica's true, terrifying plan was finally revealing itself. That's when Anthony Rossi Jr. made the decision that saved all our lives, though it took me a few minutes to grasp its magnitude. Instead of surrendering or fighting, he walked directly up to Marshal Donovan and said something that made the federal officer's face drain of all color. "Marshal," Tony said loud enough for everyone to hear, "I think you need to know that your operation has been compromised. Veronica Vance has been playing you, me, and everyone else in this community." He pulled out his phone and showed Donovan something that made the marshal immediately start shouting orders to his deputies, but not the orders any of us expected. "Stand down immediately," Donovan commanded, "all weapons holstered. This is not the situation we were briefed on." I watched Veronica's confident expression crumble as her meticulously orchestrated plan imploded in real time. What Tony revealed changed everything I thought I knew about the past 30 years. Veronica Vance wasn't just a Rossi family lawyer or a corrupt cop. She'd been running her own criminal organization for the past 15 years, using information from both the Federal Witness Protection Program and the Rossi crime family to build a network worth over $50 million in laundered money, drug profits, and extortion payments. "She's been selling witness locations to crime families for years," Tony explained to Marshal Donovan, while Veronica stood frozen in the yard. "But she's also been selling crime family information to federal law enforcement. She's playing every side against the middle, and today was supposed to eliminate everyone who could expose her operation." The corrupt deputies aiding Veronica suddenly found themselves surrounded by genuine federal agents, their faces reflecting the dawning realization of how profoundly they'd been used. Marcus processed this revelation with the tactical brilliance that filled me with pride, even amidst what felt like the end of the world. "Dad," he said quietly, "if Veronica's been running her operation for 15 years, then everything about our lives here has been compromised from the beginning." I nodded, a chilling truth sinking in. Our peaceful community wasn't a haven at all. It was a carefully managed prison, where Veronica could monitor and control multiple federal witnesses while extracting information to sell to the highest bidder. "She's been watching us, documenting our routines, probably planning to eliminate us for years," I said. Today wasn't about Rossi's revenge. It was about cleaning up loose ends so she could disappear with her accumulated wealth. The distant thrum of helicopters promised genuine federal backup, but I wasn't sure they'd arrive in time to stop Veronica's final desperate contingency. Her last card was a dead man's switch, connected to explosives she'd planted throughout the community over months. Charges that would level every house and eliminate every witness if she didn't check in with her handler every 12 hours. "Gentlemen," she announced, her voice unnervingly calm, a testament to her meticulous planning, "I've been very thorough. If I don't make a scheduled phone call in the next 6 minutes, this entire community becomes a very large crater. Everyone who could testify about my activities becomes a tragic casualty of a gas leak explosion." Marshal Donovan immediately grabbed his radio, calling for bomb disposal units and evacuation teams. But we all knew 6 minutes wasn't nearly enough time to clear the area or locate and disarm professionally placed explosives. However, Veronica continued, "I'm prepared to make that phone call in exchange for safe passage to a non-extradition country and a written guarantee that no charges will be filed against me or my associates." That was the moment. 30 years of preparation, of living a hidden life, had all led to this. Everything I'd learned about patience, planning, and surviving against impossible odds was about to be tested one final time. I pulled out the USB drive I'd carried since escaping the vault, not just Rossi family evidence, but recordings of every conversation I'd had with Veronica over the past 6 months, including detailed discussions of her corruption network and her plans to eliminate witnesses. "Veronica," I called out, holding the drive aloft so she could clearly see it, "you made one mistake in your planning. You assumed I was just a helpless old man hiding from the mob. But I've been recording every conversation, documenting every suspicious activity, and building a case against you for months." Her confident control fractured into sheer panic. Her dead man's switch wasn't the only weapon on the field. Marshal Donovan, I continued, everything you need to dismantle her entire network is on this drive, including the location of her explosives and the identity of everyone on her payroll. The helicopters roared closer. I saw Veronica calculating, assessing if she had enough time for her final deadly solution before genuine federal agents arrived. But after 30 years of living with the violence of others, I was well ready to end this game on my terms. The thunderous roar of FBI helicopters landing in the field behind Pine Lake was the sound of a storm breaking, a storm 30 years in the making. But Veronica's finger was already moving toward the detonator. In that split second, I made the decision that would either save everyone or doom us all. Veronica, I shouted, my voice cutting across the yard with the authority of a man with nothing left to lose. Before you press that button, you might want to know that the explosives you planted aren't going to work the way you planned. Her hand froze midair, genuine confusion finally clouding her face for the first time in this nightmare. You see, when you've been living in the same community for 30 years, you notice when people start digging holes and planting things that don't belong there. Elena Rodriguez used to be a demolitions expert for the Morales cartel, and she's been systematically disarming your charges for the past 3 months. The absolute shock on Veronica's face was worth every single one of those 30 years of careful planning, but I wasn't done exposing how thoroughly she'd underestimated the people she'd tried to manipulate. Marcus moved before Veronica could even process my words, his SWAT training propelling him across the distance. Her distraction over her useless dead man's switch, giving him the advantage. But Veronica had survived 15 years of playing every side against the middle by being faster, more vicious than anyone expected. She managed to draw her service weapon and fire 2 shots before Marcus could reach her. The first bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him, sending him sprawling across the yard. But his momentum carried him close enough to tackle her before she could line up a killing shot. They went down in a tangle of limbs and metal, fighting for control of the gun, while Tony's remaining men and the corrupt deputies watched in stunned silence, unsure whether to help Veronica or surrender to the federal agents now emerging from the helicopters, armed with tactical gear and warrants months in the making. Agent Sarah Evans, stepping from the lead helicopter with an undeniable aura of authority that commanded immediate attention, had been tracking Veronica's corruption network for 2 years, as part of a federal task force investigating organized crime infiltration of law enforcement across the southwestern United States. Veronica Vance, she announced, her voice amplified by a bullhorn. You are under arrest for racketeering, conspiracy, money laundering, witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and about 47 other federal charges that will put you away for the rest of your natural life. The evidence I'd collected wasn't just insurance against the Rossi family. It was the final crucial piece of a federal investigation that had been building cases against corrupt officials across 3 states, using information from witnesses like me, who documented suspicious activities for years without realizing we were contributing to a much larger operation. We've been monitoring your communications for 6 months, Agent Evans continued, as her team spread out, arresting the corrupt deputies and securing the scene with professional efficiency. The revelation that our community had been under federal surveillance, not as potential criminals, but as unwitting intelligence assets, added another layer of complexity to a situation that had already challenged everything I thought I understood about the past 30 years. Mr. Miller, Agent Evans said, as her agents cuffed Veronica and read her rights, your documentation of suspicious activities in this community, combined with similar reports from other relocated witnesses across the region, helped us identify patterns of corruption we might never have discovered through traditional methods. Elena Rodriguez, monitoring radio traffic during the firefight, confirmed that federal agencies had indeed been receiving and analyzing our seemingly routine reports about unusual visitors, suspicious maintenance, and irregular communication for years, constructing a comprehensive picture of Veronica's operation far beyond our imagining. You weren't just protecting yourselves, Agent Evans explained. You were protecting hundreds of other witnesses and potential victims by helping us understand how organized crime was infiltrating federal law enforcement. Anthony Rossi Jr. found himself in the surreal position of being arrested alongside the very woman who'd manipulated his family's revenge for her own profit. But his cooperation with Marshal Donovan had earned him something unexpected, a chance at redemption instead of a death sentence. Mr. Rossi, Agent Evans said as her agents cuffed both him and Veronica, "Your information about Ms. Vance's operation has been invaluable. The Justice Department is prepared to offer you a plea agreement in exchange for your continued cooperation in dismantling what remains of organized crime networks in federal law enforcement." Tony looked at me across the yard, and for the first time since he'd arrived, his expression held something other than pure hatred. "Henry," he said, his voice carrying a weariness that spoke of 20 years carrying his father's grudges, "maybe it's time for both our families to find a different way to honor the dead." The federal agents escorting him to their vehicle treated him with the professional respect reserved for cooperating witnesses, not violent criminals. I realized then that even Tony's dramatic arrival had been part of a larger federal operation designed to expose the full extent of Veronica's corruption. The medical team that arrived with the federal agents confirmed Marcus's shoulder wound was serious, but not life-threatening. As they stabilized him for transport to the hospital, he managed to grasp my hand with his good arm and say something that made the past 30 years of deception and fear suddenly feel profoundly worthwhile. "Dad," he whispered, his voice weak but determined, "I understand now why you did what you did. You weren't hiding from your past. You were preparing for this moment when you could finally fight back and protect people who couldn't protect themselves." The pride in his eyes as the paramedics loaded him into the ambulance was everything I'd hoped for and everything I'd been terrified I'd never see. It was confirmation that despite all the lies, the secrets, the careful manipulations, he'd grown into exactly the man I'd wished he would become. "Son," I replied, my voice cracking with 3 decades of suppressed emotion, "you became everything I hoped you would be, not because of the lies I told you, but because of the man you chose to become despite those lies." The ensuing investigation laid bare the full scope of Veronica's corruption. 53 law enforcement officers across 12 states, 22 federal officials, and a money laundering operation that had processed over $200 million in criminal proceeds over 15 years. But more importantly for our community, it revealed we hadn't been victims waiting to be slaughtered. It had been an intelligence-gathering operation, unknowingly building the case against organized crime infiltration of federal law enforcement. Elena Rodriguez's meticulous documentation of suspicious activities, George Thompson's quiet surveillance of unusual visitors, and the Williams family's monitoring of communication patterns had all contributed to a federal investigation finally ready to dismantle decades-old corruption networks. "What you built here," Agent Evans told me as her team finished processing the evidence, "wasn't just survival. It was a model for how witness protection could work when people are empowered to protect each other, instead of being isolated and dependent on systems that might be compromised." Veronica's final words as Agent Evans led her away in handcuffs were a hollow threat after all. "We'd survived. This won't end the corruption, Henry. There are others, and they'll come for you eventually." "Let them come," I replied, looking around at the community of survivors who'd stood together when it mattered most. "We'll be ready." Agent Evans paused beside me, a smile on her face that suggested 30 years of careful preparation had paid off in ways I'd never imagined. "Mr. Miller," she said, "the Justice Department would like to offer you a position as a consultant on witness protection reform. It seems you've developed some innovative ideas about community-based security that could benefit others in similar situations." The offer was tempting, but after 3 decades of living in secret, all I truly wanted was the chance to live openly with the family and community I'd helped protect. Marcus's voice on the radio, weak but determined, confirmed he was stable and already asking when he could return to help with the cleanup. And I knew that whatever came next, we'd face it together as a family that had finally learned to trust each other with the truth. 6 months after the Pine Lake incident became a federal case study in organized crime infiltration and witness protection reform, I found myself on the front porch of the cabin I'd called home for 30 years. I watched Marcus teach his 8-year-old nephew how to fish in the same lake where I'd once dumped evidence bags to keep them from those who would have killed us all for their contents. The shoulder wound had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar Marcus wore like a badge of honor. His transfer to the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force had given him meaningful work, utilizing everything he'd learned about surviving in a world where corruption could hide behind any badge or official seal. The boy, Marcus's sister's son, visited more frequently now that the family's secret was out. He cast his line with a concentration that mirrored his uncle's at that age. A concentration I remembered from when I was learning how to be a father to a child who'd lost everything and needed someone to show him that the world still held people worth trusting. The changes in our community were gradual but profound. Like a garden growing back after fire clears away everything choking its life. Elena Rodriguez used her experience in communications and logistics to establish a support network for newly relocated federal witnesses, helping them understand that hiding didn't mean isolation, and that building community connections could be a form of protection, not vulnerability. George Thompson surprised everyone by opening a counseling center for military veterans dealing with PTSD, using his own journey through violence and redemption to help others find ways to live with the difficult choices they'd made. The Williams family became advocates for witness protection reform, working with federal agencies to develop protocols that would prevent the systematic monitoring and manipulation Veronica had used to control our lives for 15 years. Anthony Rossi Jr.'s cooperation with federal investigators led to the dismantling of organized crime networks in 7 states. His testimony helping prosecutors secure convictions against crime family leaders who'd operated with impunity for decades. His plea agreement resulted in a 10-year sentence instead of life. The letters he sent our community showed a gradual transformation from the angry, bitter man seeking revenge to someone genuinely trying to understand how cycles of violence could be broken, not perpetuated. Henry, his most recent letter read, "My father taught me that honor meant never forgetting a slight, never forgiving an enemy. But watching what your community did when we came for you, I'm starting to think maybe real honor means protecting people instead of destroying them." The letter ended with an invitation to visit him in federal prison. Not to gloat, not for closure, but to discuss what it truly meant to choose a different path than the one family history seemed to demand. Marcus and Agent Evans collaborated on a comprehensive review of witness protection protocols, developing new guidelines emphasizing community integration and mutual support over isolation and dependence on federal oversight. Their research showed that witnesses maintaining meaningful social connections were far more likely to complete their protection terms without compromising safety. "Dad," Marcus told me during one of our evening porch conversations, "what you built here wasn't just survival. It was a model for how people can take care of each other, even when they're carrying secrets that could get them killed." The federal government offered our community official recognition as a pilot program for witness protection reform, complete with funding and resources to help others in similar situations. But we declined the formal designation, preferring the autonomy that had allowed us to survive in the first place. The media attention following Veronica's trial and conviction was intense, but brief, mostly focusing on the corruption scandal rather than the human story of people building something positive out of circumstances that should have destroyed them. Veronica herself received a 25-year federal sentence without parole. Her attempts to negotiate reduced charges by offering information about other corruption networks were rejected. Prosecutors already had everything needed to dismantle the systems she'd helped create. Her final court statement was a warning. Corruption was too deeply embedded to be eliminated by prosecuting individuals. But Judge Harrison responded that justice wasn't about eliminating all corruption everywhere, but about holding specific people accountable for specific crimes, creating consequences that would deter others. The transformation in my own life was the most unexpected. Moving from 3 decades of careful invisibility to a quiet visibility known in my community as someone who survived something terrible and chose to use that survival to help others, not to seek revenge or retreat into bitterness. Agent Evans's consulting offer evolved into a friendship, with occasional requests for advice on witness protection or organized crime infiltration, but no formal obligations tying me to the bureaucratic systems I'd spent so many years navigating and avoiding. Marcus's suggestion that I write our story initially seemed too risky, but the more I ate, the more I realized stories like ours needed telling, not as entertainment or cautionary tales, but as evidence that ordinary people can survive extraordinary circumstances without losing their humanity or capacity to care. A car pulling up the driveway interrupted my thoughts. I checked the security camera feed on my phone. It was the Peterson family, new arrivals from last month. The father, an accountant who exposed illegal pharmaceutical testing. His wife, a nurse who revealed systematic Medicare fraud. Their 2 children, 10 and 12, were still adjusting. Marcus and I, with the others, had been helping them understand that starting over didn't mean abandoning who they were. "Marcus," I called to my son, still helping his nephew untangle a fishing line. "Looks like the Petersons are coming for Sunday dinner. Think that fish is big enough for everyone?" Marcus grinned, casting his line back into the lake, the afternoon sun scattering gold coins across the water. "Dad," he said, "after everything we've been through, I think we can handle feeding a few more people who need a place to belong." The boy beside him nodded seriously, refocusing on his fishing with renewed determination, understanding that this was about more than dinner. It was about building a community where people could trust each other with their secrets and their safety, where survival meant helping others survive, and where the past could inform the future without defining it. Sometimes the people who seem powerless are simply waiting for the right moment to fight back. Hank's story proves that with patience, preparation, and the courage to stand for what's right, even the most corrupt systems can be brought down. Family bonds, community support, and never giving up on justice can overcome any enemy, no matter how powerful they believe themselves to be. If stories like this inspire you to believe in the power of truth and justice, hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible tales of family, redemption, and triumph over corruption. This story is brought to you by the residents of Pine Lake, a community that double-checks every gate code. Stay defiant.